In the damp oak forests of Gaul, a druid priest raised a golden sickle. The blade did not touch the bark of the sacred tree, but sliced instead at the strange pale clump growing high in its branches. This was the mistletoe, a plant that lived not in the earth, but upon another. The Druids believed it held the very soul of the oak, and they caught the falling sprigs in a spotless white cloth, never letting them touch the ground. The ceremony was precise, governed by the moon. They harvested only on the 6th day of its cycle, when the plant's power was thought to be at its peak. In the cloth lay the waxy white berries, plump and opaque. To the Druids, these were not mere seeds, but vessels of potent magic, a charm for fertility in the fields, and a sovereign remedy, they believed, against all manner of poisons. A Roman observer named Pliny the Elder recorded this ritual in the 1st century after Christ, his stylus scratching the details onto a wax tablet. He noted the reverence, the golden tool, the white linen. For Pliny, it was a curious barbarian superstition, a fragment of a world Rome was conquering. Yet, in that description, he preserved the first written thread of a story that would weave this parasitic plant into human culture for 2 millennia. Centuries after the Druids' rituals, the mistletoe story travelled north. In the stark winters of Scandinavia, its green leaves stood out against the skeletal branches of sleeping oaks and ash trees. To Norse storytellers huddled around longhouse fires, this evergreen parasite, thriving when all else seemed dead, held a profound and unsettling power. It became a plant of contradiction, life persisting in death's season. That contradiction crystallized in myth. The gods, it was said, amused themselves by hurling weapons at the invulnerable Baldur, for his mother had secured oaths from all things to harm him. But she had overlooked the mistletoe, seeing it as too young and harmless. Loki, the shapeshifter, spied this single weakness. He carved a slender dart from a mistletoe branch, its wood pale and deceptively soft. He placed the dart in the hand of Baldur's blind brother, Hod, and guided his aim. The shaft flew true. Baldur fell, and the world darkened. In that instant, the plant of life became an instrument of death. The myth wove the mistletoe into the fabric of fate itself, no longer just a botanical curiosity, but a symbol of vulnerability hidden in plain sight. The mistletoe that had slain a god in myth and been harvested by Druids with reverence found a new, lighter purpose centuries later. In the drawing rooms of 18th century England, a sprig of the evergreen plant began appearing above door frames during the winter festivities. It was no longer a sacred symbol or a weapon, but an invitation. A curious social custom was taking root. The rules were simple and tactile. When a gentleman caught a lady standing beneath that hanging cluster of forked leaves and waxy white berries, he could claim a kiss. With each embrace, he would pluck a single berry from the stem and discard it. The ritual was governed by the plant's own biology. The privilege lasted only as long as the fruit remained. When the last berry was gone, the kissing bough lost its power. This direct, physical link between the berries and the ritual embedded the plant's tangible presence into the tradition. Unknowingly, these revelers were handling the very source of the plant's latent danger, transforming a potentially toxic fruit into a playful counter in a game of seasonal romance. As the kissing custom spread, the plant itself began appearing in new places. By the 1800s, dried mistletoe hung not just in festive halls, but in the workrooms of European apothecaries. Herbalists, intrigued by its mythical reputation, started grinding its leaves and steeping its berries, seeking to catalogue its medicinal properties in their leather-bound journals. The case notes that followed were starkly different from the folklore. A French gardener, seeking a remedy for joint pain, brewed a tea from a handful of leaves. Within the hour, he was bent double over a basin, his gut seized by violent cramps. The pages recorded relentless vomiting, followed by waves of debilitating diarrhea that left him weak for days. These were not isolated incidents. Across the continent, similar reports accumulated. A child who popped a few berries, a woman who took an extract for female troubles. The symptoms were consistently gastrointestinal, a clear, distressing signature. The apothecary's curiosity turned to caution. They began labeling their jars with warnings, the first formal recognition of the festive plant's toxic potential. Those 19th century case notes of vomiting and cramping had described the symptoms, but not the cause. The mystery of what exactly made mistletoe toxic migrated from apothecary shops to university laboratories. In Germany, during the early 1900s, chemists turned from folklore to biochemistry. They began the meticulous work of grinding down the plant's sticky white berries and dark green leaves, dissolving them in solvents and hunting for the invisible compounds responsible. Under the microscope, one group of molecules emerged from the chemical soup. These were small, sturdy proteins the researchers named viscotoxins. When introduced to living cells in a petri dish, the effect was swift and destructive. The viscotoxins latched onto the delicate outer membranes, punching microscopic holes. The cell's internal balance shattered, its contents leaking out in a silent, fatal hemorrhage at a microscopic scale. But the plant held a second weapon. The chemists isolated another type of protein, lectins. These compounds operated differently. In a blood sample, the lectins acted like a molecular glue, seeking out specific sugars on the surface of red blood cells. They caused the cells to clump together in thick, sluggish masses, a condition called agglutination, which could choke off the fine capillaries and starve tissues of oxygen. Across the Atlantic, the tradition took root with a local species. By the 1950s, American mistletoe, Phoradendron, hung in doorways from New York to California, its dark green leaves and waxy white berries becoming as much a part of Christmas as tinsel. The plant was harvested from trees across the southern states, bundled and shipped north, arriving in department stores and five and dimes just after Thanksgiving. The calls started each December, a predictable spike on the switchboards of the nation's new poison control centers. A frantic mother would describe her toddler clutching a few crushed berries. A worried pet owner reported a dog nosing under the sofa where a berry had rolled. Operators logged each case, noting the same symptoms: nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. The berries contained the same classes of compounds their European cousins possessed, lectins and viscotoxins, though in different concentrations. For a small child or a curious pet, eating a handful could mean more than a stomachache. It could depress the nervous system, slowing the heart and inducing a dangerous drowsiness. The festive sprig above the door now presented a quiet, seasonal hazard. The stream of holiday calls to poison control centers had created a pattern, a data set waiting for analysis. In 1986, a team of medical researchers opened a file containing 92 documented cases of American mistletoe ingestion. They began sorting through the reports, looking past the seasonal panic to find the actual clinical facts buried within the anecdotes. Page after page described the same, mostly minor, aftermath. The majority of reports, especially those involving just a berry or two, detailed nothing more than an upset stomach, some nausea, perhaps a bout of vomiting. For most families, the crisis ended with a worried phone call and a sigh of relief, the decoration more of a nuisance than a genuine threat. But scattered among the mild cases were a few that gave the researchers pause. These files described patients, often children who had consumed more of the plant, who grew unusually drowsy or whose heart rates slowed to a concerning crawl. These outliers were rare, but their presence was undeniable proof. The journal's final conclusion was clear. Mistletoe possessed a real, if low-grade, toxicity that demanded respect. The clinical reports from the 1980s had established the risk, but they couldn't explain the wild inconsistency in symptoms. Why did one child nibble a berry and suffer only a stomachache, while another became dangerously lethargic? The answer lay not in the patient, but in the plant itself. Modern toxicologists turned their attention from emergency rooms to laboratory benches, where they began dissecting the mistletoe's chemical secrets. Inside a sterile lab, a technician in a white coat carefully crushed a single white berry into a fine paste. They dissolved the sample in a solvent and injected it into a long, thin column inside a gas chromatograph. As the machine hummed, it began separating the berry's complex cocktail of compounds, isolating the potent viscotoxins from everything else. The readout from the instrument told a precise story. The concentration of toxins in that one berry was startlingly high, but a sample from a different plant, or even a leaf from the same branch, showed dramatically lower levels. They confirmed that toxicity wasn't a fixed property. It spiked in the berries and varied wildly between the European viscum album and the American phorodendron species, explaining the unpredictable nature of every poisoning call. The precise measurements from those labs now flowed into public health offices. Every November, as holiday decorations appeared in stores, officials drafted their annual bulletins. They selected a clear photograph. The forked green leaves, the clusters of waxy white berries. Knowing recognition was the first line of defense. The warnings were brief, factual, and timed for maximum visibility before the season's festivities began. A typical advisory landed in a pediatrician's inbox or scrolled across a local news broadcast. It stated the risk plainly. Ingestion could cause vomiting, abdominal pain, or drowsiness. The advice was always the same. Keep the decorative sprigs high up and out of reach. For a parent hanging a wreath, the cheerful plant now carried a quiet footnote of caution. The calls still came in every December to poison control centres. A worried parent, a curious toddler, a few missing berries. Specialists, armed with the latest data, could quickly assess the danger. Most cases required only watchful waiting at home. The ritual kiss under the mistletoe endured, but it was now framed by a modern understanding of its mild but real toxicity. Those annual bulletins from poison control centres never erased the tradition. Each December, the same forked green sprigs reappeared above doorways, their waxy white berries gleaming. Families unpacked decorations from dusty boxes, handling the plastic-encased mistletoe with the same casual reverence they gave tinsel and ornaments. The warning labels were there, small print on the packaging, but the ritual felt older, deeper than any modern caution. At a holiday party, laughter echoed as a couple was playfully shoved beneath the hanging bunch. A berry was plucked, a kiss was stolen, a direct, living thread back to those 18th century English customs. Just feet away, on a kitchen counter, a toddler's curious hand reached toward a fallen berry that had rolled from the arrangement. The scene held the entire history in a single, tense moment. So the plant endures, suspended between two truths. In one database, it is viscum album, a phytotoxin producer. In collective memory, it is a symbol of life in dead winter, of Baldur's death and druidic harvests. The mistletoe never changed. Our relationship to it simply layered, season after season, ancient magic undergirded by modern science, a festive risk we willingly hang in our homes.